what is the final word for today?
Is a trivial.
Trivial. Do you know that word? Have you seen that before?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Means not important.
Okay. Have you seen that word before, Mohammed? Trivial?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Pachu, can you read the first three words of that phrase, of that sentence?
Okay, sir. We shouldn't argue.
Okay. If you were just going to make one of those words big, which word would it be?
Is argue.
Okay. Now I'm going to say that word, and I want you to. There are two syllables in that word. Which syllable has the big sound? Argue. Argue.
Argue.
Argue. Which syllable has the big sound? Argue.
Are.
That's right. Can you say the word like that? Argue.
Argue.
Okay.
Argue.
So that's our big word. We have three words together: we shouldn't and argue. So we shouldn't, that would sound very small. We shouldn't argue.
We s- we s- we shouldn't argue.
We shouldn't argue.
We shouldn't argue.
Okay. Mohammed, can you say that phrase? We shouldn't argue.
We shouldn't argue
Okay. What about the next three words, Mohammed? How would you read those?
about something too.
Okay. And actually, maybe we'll just do the next two words about something. About something.
Ab-
Uh,
about something.
about something. Any big sounds in there?
About
Do you think there's anything we should emphasize
about about
about? There are some times when you would emphasize a preposition, but I think most of the time you probably won't. Those are usually words that get lost in, unless they're very special words, they usually get lost in the phrase. So something is probably in a pretty neutral sentence without a very special meaning. Probably the word you would want to focus on is something.
okay.
Which which syllable in the word something, or which word would get the emphasis? Some or thing?
Something.
Something.
Some.
That's right. Some. When you have two words together, it's almost always going to be the first word that will get the emphasis. We shouldn't argue about something. We shouldn't argue about
We
something.
shouldn't
Something.
we shouldn't argue about something.
Something. Okay, we shouldn't argue about something.
We
Pach,
shouldn't argue.
go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
We shouldn't argue about something.
hmm We shouldn't argue about something.
We
Something.
shouldn't argue about something.
hmm Pachu, can you say that phrase?
We s- we shouldn't argue about something.
Okay. And how about the next two words, Pachu? What are those two words?
So trivial.
Okay. Can you say that again?
So trivial.
Which word do you think we should emphasize in that phrase?
So
So, okay. So is it so trivial or is it so trivial?
so trivial.
Yeah, it's really big. So trivial. So trivial.
So trivial. So trivial.
We shouldn't argue about something so trivial.
We shouldn't argue about something so trivial.
Mohammed, can you say that whole sentence?
We shouldn't argue about something so trivial.
Hmm. We shouldn't argue about something so trivial.
We shouldn't argue about something so trivial.
Okay. Mohammed, how many phrases do you think we could divide this sentence into?
I think one phrase.
Just one phrase?
Yes.
Okay. I think we could do two. I think we could separate it at about. Okay. I mean, you could make it one phrase if you want. There are no rules about this, but I think it would be good to make it two like that, just to give us something to work with. Okay. Now in the
Okay.
first phrase, we shouldn't argue. What is the most important word, Mohammed?
Argue.
Argue. Okay. How do you want this phrase to sound? Do you want to sound serious or light and friendly?
Serious.
Serious? Okay. So we'll make this completely flat. We'll make this low. Argue. But we do have to start high because you normally will start a phrase high. We shouldn't argue. We shouldn't argue.
We shouldn't argue.
Hmm. We shouldn't argue.
We shouldn't argue.
Pachu, can you say that? We shouldn't argue.
We shouldn't argue.
Okay.
We shouldn't argue.
What about the next phrase, Pachu, about something so trivial? What which how do you want that to sound? Do you want that to sound serious or light and friendly and nice?
Make serious.
Serious? Okay.
Yes.
So in the final part of the phrase it will sound like so trivial. So trivial. So trivial.
So trivial.
But how should you start the
So
phrase?
trivial.
How will you start it?
Is a high tone
Okay. About something so trivial.
about something so trivial.
We shouldn't argue about something so trivial.
We shouldn't argue about something so trivial.
Okay, Pachu, is it argue or is it argue?
Is argue. I have
Uh,
to do it in opposite direction.
but if you wanted to sound positive, if you want to sound positive, it would be the opposite. It would be argue, not argue,
Yes.
but the opposite.
Yes.
Argue. You can do that if you want. Argue. We shouldn't argue. You can do that.
We shouldn't. Yeah. We shouldn't argue.
No, you see, you're doing it. You're still going argue, but it's
Okay.
the opposite.
Sorry.
It's argue. Fall down, not.
We shouldn't. Okay. So we shouldn't argue.
You're still doing it. You're saying
So
argue.
we shouldn't argue.
Argue. Argue.
Argue.
Ar.
Argue.
Ar. We shouldn't.
Argue.
We shouldn't argue.
We shouldn't argue.
That's better. To say the whole sentence.
We shouldn't argue about something so trivial.
Is it so trivial or so trivial?
So trivial.
That sounds better. It sounds more natural if you do it like that. So trivial.
So trivial.
Hmm? We shouldn't argue about something so trivial.
We shouldn't argue
Ar-
about something.
Not argue. Argue.
Argue.
Argue.
Argue.
Hmm.
We shouldn't argue about something so trivial.
That's better. That's much better. Mohammed, can you say the entire phrase?
We shouldn't argue about something so trivial.
Mm-hmm. Mohammed, can you make a what we argue about question? Do that in the present progressive. What we argue about. Do that in the present progressive.
What we are arguing about.
Okay, present progressive. We are arguing. How do you make a question? A yes no question with we are arguing. How do you make a yes no question?
What are we arguing
Yeah, you
about?
have to use the question form. What are we arguing about? Try again.
What are we arguing about?
Now in that phrase, in that question, what is the most important word?
What?
What? Okay. How do you think it would sound if you combine what plus are plus we?
What are we?
What are we? What are we?
What are we? What are we?
What are we? And then we have arguing about. What are we arguing about?
What are we arguing about?
Mm-hmm. Pachu, can you make that question? What are we arguing about? Pachu,
What are you arguing about?
again, tell me again. What are we arguing about?
What What are you arguing
We're
about?
saying we. What are we arguing about? What are we arguing about?
What are we arguing about?
What is the most important word in that question, Pachu?
So what
Oh, your sound is breaking up for some reason. What are we? What? What is the most important word? What are we? What are we arguing about?
what
What are we?
what are we?
What are
What
we
are we?
arguing about?
What are we arguing about?
Mm-hmm. Can you make that question again, Mohammed? What are we arguing about?
What are we arguing about?
Let's say the answer is we're arguing about something trivial.
We are arguing
Mm-hmm.
about something trivial.
We're arguing about something trivial.
We are arguing about something trivial.
Pachi, what are we arguing about?
We are arguing about something trivial.
Okay, all right. Well, I think that we have to stop here for today. And
Thank you, sir.
I think I'll be back in about 9 hours to do another one. So if you want to come back and practice again, that would be what, like 6 a.m. Mexico City time. Okay.
Yes,
So
yes.
thank you
Okay.
everyone for participating and making comments and asking questions. And hope you come back the next time. Okay. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Bye bye.